Pico. You're watching Thorin's YouTube.
As you said, when you came to complexity and CGS and this big league, one of the things you didn't mention is, you're right, your team basically was like the best team in Source. Like, you were undefeated. There was even some small LANs, if you remember, like the New Egg stuff where you were allowed to attend and win those as well. And there was even online cops as well. This team was amazing. The obvious flaw was CGS wasn't a one discipline sport. It wasn't Counter-Strike. Like, it was a thing where the whole franchise had to play. And so obviously in this particular case, it wasn't even just that it was bad GMing. It's that in this game, it turned out that the scoring system in CS meant that was never the most important game. And you remember, it was like things like Dead or Alive or the racing game. That was really what won the franchises. For example, if anyone looks up the team that won the first CGS Chicago Chimera, it was because they had like the best racing car driver guy or whatever. So they always got 10 points or whatever the stat was back then. Whereas famously in CS, the joke is in a CS match, a good CS win, it was MR9, would be you win like 9-4. But the problem is he still gets 4 points and you get 9. So you can never have the same crazy gap. So the question I have to ask you, it's an obvious one, is it must have been frustrating to know that you're the best team, but because it's not the traditional Counter-Strike circuit, you don't really get to win the same prize money or be like the equivalent of winning the major, right? It was kind of like you were stuck in a way, right? You couldn't go past a certain point because of the franchise, right?
Sure, it was frustrating. And just people that aren't familiar, the CGS had like 8 franchises, so like Dallas, Chicago, Los Angeles, and each team, I think, had like 4 or 5 games, and all these players were drafted and you had to qualify. So they were legitimately the best players, per se, in each game. But the way the matches worked is you played versus the other franchise, you play all the games, and you get points depending on the win or loss.
Yes.
Fortunately for us, we didn't have some of the players that were very good in some of our other games. So they were kind of like last place every time. So we didn't get to qualify for the playoffs, although we won every single Counter-Strike match. So, we were winning all ours, and then we just were kind of held back by some of the other players. So it was frustrating in that aspect, when you don't have any control of your fate, relying on other, games and people. So it was frustrating. But, like you said, it was nice because we got to attend these other LAN events and kind of made up for it. And we're able to keep some of that, momentum going on our team and having our own success.
What was it like to play with fRoD? Because even though some people at the time might have said he was cocky or arrogant, I always used to think, yeah, but if you actually saw how good he was fucking good at AWPing. Like, he was really good.
Yeah. He is very confident person. I would say borderline arrogant. So, but like you said, he backed it up. I would say at his prime, he probably was the best sniper, maybe top 3 at the worst. You put, I think, like Mark Kalaver up there. Wally was really good. Alu was amazing.
Kogu, Brazilian.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, he's just insane. He never missed a flick shot. If you're hitting his sight and he was holding the ankle, like, he's going to take 2 people out before you get to him. So the only way you could beat him is if you put him out of position, you forced him to rotate, and he just, again, he does not miss. He did not miss.
And then you said it before, in this team, obviously the crazy signing was you guys got Zet to come over from fucking NIP in Sweden and play in this team in CGS. And I've told this story before, but like, even though everyone knows from 1.6 Zet was insane, the actual thing that impressed me more was when I came to that house and we were doing that guide, and I was just stood watching him play a random game, a 10-man in 1.6, a CSO scrim, even Rocket Arena. I mean, he used to play like fucking Dead or Alive, beat him up. Any game this guy played, Rambo, he was fucking insane at all of them. Like, this guy's got to be one of the purest gamers I've ever met.
For sure. And also phenomenal at table tennis. It would just whoop
just everything every time. Okay.
Yeah, and he had the highest sensitivity I've ever seen anyone use. And so his hand-eye coordination, his feeling in his fingers and hands, one of the best. It's just, I couldn't even imagine controlling with the precision he had. So just insane reaction speed, very confident. He would take every single duel, and it was kind of a breath. It was just huge impact that he made, because he also had a different style. And, and it's like he had this aura about him of being Swedish. And when he would play versus NA players, I think they felt it, right? So he's just a space taker, playmaker, and an amazing player.
Do you remember what it was like the day you just got told, yeah, CGS has just completely collapsed, like it's over? Do you remember what this day was like?
I don't remember the day or what that was. Probably very disappointing because we were having an amazing time in Los Angeles. At that point, we'd lived there for about 2 seasons. We're living in Marina Del Rey, luxury apartments, highest salaries. I mean, we're all just living it up. Like all, the whole 8 franchises, all our friends, all our playing tennis or swimming, uh, so it was amazing. But then when we found out it was over, it's like, what now? Because it was so good, even though we were losing matches and stuff. But like, this felt like it was headed the right direction in terms of, you know, the production, the salary, the prizes, and all that. So it's definitely disappointing. I remember after that, I was still hungry to compete, and I still loved Counter Strike, but spending almost 2 years learning Source and then going back to 1.6, it was a huge shift, and I think I kind of got burned out because it's just kind of going back to the same old thing. And then, with the death of the CGS, you had the best 8 teams in North America. 8 years of experience of Counter Strike. Pretty much most of them retired, so that left this like huge void in Counter Strike where now all like the tier 2 players, were kind of stepping up. So it was, I think that, a lot of people say it might be one of the biggest hits in NACS was the death of CGS. And ever since then, essentially like the region hasn't been able to catch up because Europe was still playing 1.6 at that time. And they had all these captains and players like transferring that knowledge, developing young players that was missed out after the death of CGS.
That's one thing I did want to ask you. Right, to be fair, I can remember the context at the time was actually even European players around this era, Rambo, didn't know how much longer 1.6 would last. In fact, famously, people used to sort of say, next year's the last year of 1.6, and everyone sort of waited for the game to die or get replaced or something, and the prize purses were going down. So at the time, I don't blame you for not coming back. But the reason I would ask this question of like, did you ever think about it again, is because that was the end of your playing career. Like, not only if you'd have known there was going to be 3 or 4 years, could you have potentially grinded back in 1.6? But I always think to myself, it's not like you were that old at the time. You could have played at the beginning of CSGO. I even think that game might have suited you, mate. You would have been very good at that game, I think. Do you ever think about what could have been?
I maybe if after CGS it died and then the rest of the world had been playing CSGO, I would have made that switch. But it was at that time the whole world hadn't switched yet, and it was still it was reverting back to 1.6. So that didn't, yeah. So I felt like that was the reason. But I did like CS:GO. I felt like the pace was a little bit more faster. It wasn't slow pace. It was kind of bunny hopping, and it was kind of fresh, because at that time I'd played CS 1.6 for like 7 years, and then a new kind of game in physics was a breath of fresh air.
Right, as you said, when you came to Complexity, that was actually an era where you swapped and you became the in-game leader. You did a little bit in 3D, but in this team, you were the in-game leader because obviously they replaced Twist, Trip, and Warden with not Trip. Trip was replaced by you, obviously, to come into the squad to be the new player. And he was the in-game leader before in their old team. So the question I would have is this: did you like being in-game leader? Did it suit you?
I did, yeah. At that time, I felt like I was very comfortable with it. Obviously, having all that experience. I felt like I understood the game and I can make predictions and read teams, make calls, counter strats. So even before I became the IGL for Complexity, I was always watching demos of other teams prepping for matches. So later on, when I became the IGL on Team 3D, I was kind of famous for anti-stratting, and teams didn't want to play versus us because I was always collecting info, taking notes, always watching at least 2 demos of every opponent before a match, and I would legit like create new strategies just to beat certain players or tendencies. So it was a huge part of the reason why we won a lot of matches, and yeah, and it's fun. I love being an IGL.
One of the interesting things to me is I obviously got to work with you when, as I said before, we wrote that guide, The Art of Counter-Strike. And even though if someone goes and downloads it now, like spoiler, it's not going to be that crazy now because we did write this in like 2007 or something. Obviously now a lot of that information is known and people have played enough hours, figured out the simple concept of how to hold an angle. But I would just say this, even if back then people flamed us and went, it's just basic stuff. It wasn't like what we actually did. I thought our vision for that guide was really good, Rambo, because what I remember us saying was, the guide wasn't supposed to be for like a top pro to get better and be as good as you. It was actually supposed to be for the beginner. The idea was we wanted it to be like a real guide, like you could buy in a shop. And the idea is if you were a beginner and you just were a casual player, this will tell you quite literally all the fundamentals of CS, like how to hold an angle, how to play, which guns to use, how to use technique, for example. Don't just full auto spray, burst on the first 3 bullets away. I thought actually we did it. If anyone who goes back, we did a pretty good job, I think, of like the way it was laid out. That looked pretty good. What did you think about the process of doing that? I found it quite interesting.
Yeah, no, it was great. I think you and Steele, or Ogo, it came to me with that idea, and I was like, I love it. Let's do it. At the time, I had been giving lessons on the side because I love teaching the game, so it made perfect sense. We all met together in Dallas at the gaming house for a week or so, and just brainstormed figuring out what needs to be in here. So, with any guide, obviously, everything's not going to be new, but there's really valuable pieces of nuggets that you might have missed that could be helpful for your game. So, being able to have that vision early on to, want to help people and share that knowledge, I think it was an awesome experience.
Yeah, that's actually one thing. Look, later in the interview, towards the end, we'll address something you're doing currently along these lines. But also, back in the day, ESEA, before it became like a POG service with all the online game things, where it was basically like the face of its day, before that, it was actually famous for being where you got lessons. And obviously, people like you and K-Shot and all the famous players did lessons. You were one of the people who did a decent amount, though, right? It was a good way to make like a side living.
Yeah, I was charging hourly. I think at one point I was the person that gave the most lessons because they had like a little rank or leaderboard. So, I mean, it started as a kind of a lesson thing, and then, just love teaching the game, helping people get better.
Right, if people don't know, if they're not old school in CSGO, you did come back in CSGO, but as a coach. And one of the interesting things, like I alluded to before, where in CS 1.6 at the end, you went to that E-Stars event in Seoul. Well, you got the hookup later because your first team in CSGO you coached was the Korean MVP team. So people know the one that had some of those famous players that, I mean, some of them are even in Valorant now, like some of the better players from that. What was that like? I mean, as far as I know, you actually went and lived in Korea with them and like were in the house and stuff. So give me some thoughts. What was it like to work with a Korean Counter-Strike team?
Sure, yeah. So that opportunity came through from Kan Yang, just in OG. So he's been in esports, and I knew him from all these events, and I always wanted to live in Korea. So I messaged him. I was like, "Hey, are there any opportunities?" He's like, "Well, actually, yeah, we need a coach for our project team." So I was like, "Done deal." I was there in like 3 weeks. Kan hooked me up with everything. Moved into Team MVP. They had like 3 apartments where they had an Overwatch team, a Dota team, and 2 Counter-Strike teams.
That makes sense, yeah.
So there was a team with Termi, Solo, and Bale.
So the old school players.
Low. Yeah, like I think 4 out of those 5 players are now Valorant coaches, and all 4 of them qualified for like the Korean Valorant finals or something. So, but I didn't coach that team. I coached the project team, which were like the younger kids. And so, yeah, I lived there with all of them full time in the apartment, working with some of the players. Zine, I would say, he still plays now. I think plays for like a Thailand team. He's a phenomenal player. So it was amazing working with the young talent. Unfortunately, my Korean wasn't good enough to speak technical Counter-Strike talk and provide the kind of criticism and solutions that I needed to. So there was language barriers. So, but no, it was a great experience. I lived there for a year. We went to a bunch of events, had some success. We won like the Twitch Korea Counter-Strike LAN finals. We got second in some Chinese event called like Top Final. So it was a great experience. I got to kind of be around the other players and the infrastructure and the staff and see what it's like to be in Korean esports.
Do you have, it's okay if you don't, do you have like a funny story? Because one thing I know that is very weird, I lived in Korea myself for a while, is the culture shock can be really crazy. Like the way they do things is so different, their idea of expectations of, is there any funny story you can give me of what it was like to live with them?
Well, I mean, to be honest, a lot of the weekends we would get drunk and then go to karaoke. So some of the staff players in Cannes, we'd go eat barbecue and we'd be up till 5 a.m. getting hammered. So that's very common in Korea.
When you say that though, Ronald, one thing people might not know about Koreans is when you say karaoke, people are going to think Western style. I'll guarantee they were doing what Koreans do, where they're all singing like love ballads and stuff, aren't they? Like crazy, like pop songs. Was that what people were singing?
Sure, yeah. It's whatever someone wants to sing, you'll sing,
Right.
but it's not like they're shy away or anything. It's like, no, it's pretty much like you always end with karaoke and you get a bunch of sides and you drink soju and, they've got, I mean, if you walk outside, you'll maybe even see like 3 karaoke places at any given point. And so it's,
What was your go-to? What was a song Ronald would sing at karaoke?
Gosh, I think I sang some Bruno Mars.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a good voice?
When I'm drunk.
All right, sure. Yeah, by the way, if you don't know, guys, that's the essential part, is everyone gets super drunk on soju before they do this, so then no one's inhibited. And also, remember, in Asia, they do like, you hire a room. You're not out in front of like 100 people. You just hire a room and it's you and your friend. It's actually a really cool thing to do if anyone ever goes. It's really fun, isn't it? You don't have to be a good singer. You don't have to be good. It's not.
No, you're just having fun at that point.
Yes.
Yeah,
What about after this? You obviously came back, and the funny thing is, you got to reunite with Jason Lake and Complexity and work with them, right? What was it actually like to go? Was it Jason Lake reached out? How did he come to coach Complexity?
Yeah, so I was in Korea. Warden, Matt Dickens, the former player I played with in Complexity, he was the coach, and then became the general manager of Complexity. So he messaged me and he's like, "Hey, we need a coach." And at that point, I was at MVP for about a year, and I was kind of missing home. And they were headquartered 10 minutes from my hometown in Dallas, in Frisco, Texas. So I told them yes, and so I moved in. We all had all 5 members in the same apartment. We would go and train at an office. The team that we had the most success with there was ShahZaM, Stanislaw, Def, Android, and Ye, who Stanislaw still playing, and the other 4 members had great success in Valorant, and Sentinels, and Def is the coach now of M80 CS. So yeah, we trained full-time for a year. We had a couple roster changes, but that was like the main crew. The highlight for me was reaching top 8 at the Face It London Major in 2018. So we were actually had to qualify through the open bracket. Like we were not even ranked top 50 at the time. So to play every match, grind through the open qualifier, and we literally made it to the top 8 of the major. I think at one point we were like top 12 in the world. So, I think get a lot of credit to Warden. He doesn't get enough of being able to scout these hidden players and put them together. And, to make top 8 at a major as an unranked team in a year, it's quite impressive. So, hats off to Warden and all the players and what we were able to do together.
Let me ask about some of these players. So obviously ShahZaM himself not only was like a known player in CSGO, but as you say in Sentinels, he was a pretty famous Valorant player too, and now he's known as a huge personality. But he's an interesting guy, because one thing I've always found interesting about this guy is, one, he does seem like a ridiculously enormous troll. Like his whole personality is like, I can imagine he's the guy where on your team it's maybe cool to have, but it's like you'd be so annoyed if he was on the other team. And then even his style of play is sort of similar from what I remember, which is like he's super streaky. He just goes for every crazy shot and fucking flick shot 98 degrees across the screen. Give me some thoughts on this player. Was he like that to play with?
He was. So ShahZaM is very expressive person, extrovert, not afraid to be himself, and not afraid of the moment either. And so he might call him a showman, but he would go for these plays, but he would fully believe he could do it. And he would pull them off most often than not, especially when it mattered. So I felt like that ability to be on camera and have the eyes on him kind of helped him in that case. So he always performed when he needed to. And to be honest, he didn't provide any trouble or conflict in the team where, on stream, he acts goofy and like you might make some assumptions, but as an actual person, he actually has a good heart. and he was a good person to be with. He did have some ups and downs. He gets very passionate, emotional at the game, but it never turned into a problem.
And then, as you say, you had Stanislaw as the in-game leader of this team, who people will know before that and had some success later. He went back to Evil Geniuses and had some success. The only thing about this guy is he's actually quite an unusual, like people might know, he's not a very public person. He doesn't tend to do lots of interviews. One of the interesting things is, even though a lot of the people who've played with him told me he was the good in-game leader, I always got the sense he was a little bit like, let me think the best, put it this way, sometimes part of leading isn't just called the tactic. It's like you sometimes have to be like the bigger brother in some ways, like I always wondered, was he a bit strange in that dynamic? What was he actually like with the players?
He's a world-class player in terms of the fact that he literally made no mistakes. He had a very strong intuition. He had all the experience in the world.
Sure.
And he had good pattern recognition, so he was good at making strats on the fly. I wouldn't say he was a big brother figure because he was.
No, I meant like that was the part I sort of didn't see in his game. Like I always wondered, was he a bit weird socially or something? Like I just didn't. He's hard for me to read. Basically, I found him inscrutable.
That's the right way to say it,
right?
Because he's very to himself. He's not like this. Kumbaya type of guy. Right. So he's very to himself, very introverted. But he was a phenomenal tactician and player, and very clutch. So, that's, not everyone has everything. I would say as an IGL, you need to build that bond that I felt like he could have done better at. But in terms of his ability as a captain and a player, in that aspect, he was phenomenal.
When you were the coach of teams like this, how demanding a coach were you? Were you someone where you were you more of a supportive staff? Did you try to sometimes impose your vision, or were you a disciplinarian? What type of coach were you?
So me, I at that point in my life, I was very structured. So I'm all about efficiency and optimization. So we have every single week blocked ahead, what team are playing what maps, how much time we have. We're always blocking out the beginning of the scrims of server work time, what are objectives, what 2 or 3 strats we're working on, and then feedback and review time. And I felt like Stanislaw wasn't his style. And so that we had a little bit of conflict, and that's ultimately the reason why I was removed. But I'm all about preparation and the time spent in the server work and the time and demo reviewing. And I felt like some of the players weren't all up to that kind of homework. So, but that's my style. It's all about prep work, maximizing practice time, and then fixing mistakes.
One thing I've found is weird is sometimes I've talked to people who were coaches who themselves were legendary players, and they say one of the problems is sometimes when you're the coach, you actually talk to your players and you find out this guy doesn't even know who I am. Like he doesn't actually know I was literally not just a player. I was one of the best. Like, did the players in your teams know who you were? Did they remember Rambo? Did they know who you were from your playing career?
I think some of them did, but not all of them. Because they were still like, some of them were like 19 or 20.
Right.
But I think, so I don't know if they particularly watched my matches and they kind of know. Also because I took that long break and I hadn't been around in that, and then the new CS. So it's definitely a period where I had to prove myself. And that social dynamic is completely different from as a player, as a coach. So that communication, it's kind of different. It's being the older person and not actually being the server with them. So, you got to pick your approach on how you communicate with these players, because essentially as a coach, you have to you have to point out mistakes, and that could be a very sensitive subject.
Sure.
Because people can get defensive, so you got to be a little suave in that aspect. So, but you got to also have buy-in too. So you got to explain your reasons of why we should do this and why not. And sometimes you're not all on the same page. And I felt like as a coach, you don't have that kind of connection as you do if I was a strat caller or a player. So you got to pick and choose your battles.
Right. To me, there wasn't really coaches in CS until I would say maybe like 2015 or something. And even then, they started out as like just almost like you just watch the demos and then they decide if they do what you say. And it's only now people know it's more like sports where they can control the team, bench people, bring players in. So obviously in 1.6, there was no coaches. Do you ever wonder, if you think back now, how your career might have been different? Like, what would Team 3D have been like if they've had a coach? Would it have been good? Would it have not fit the team? What do you think it would have been like if the 1.6 teams could have had coaches?
It has to. When you're a coach, you've got to. I'm looking for someone that's been there and done it.
Right.
So, but at that time, we didn't have that time gap.
Sure.
But if I have a coach that comes in and be like, let me show you this insane execution. I'm going to show you all these nades and then the reactions of if they do this and do that. It's like, okay, you've created this amazing recipe and this formula. Let's try it. And you've done all the homework and you explain the reason. It's like, wow, you just saved us so much time. So that alone is amazing. Or, if this coach provides a scouting report, be like, if you finish this site, 80% of the time this player plays here and there. Or if you see this player here, watch for a crossfire here. I don't have to do all that demo work. So, there's kind of like that in-game, that research process that coaches can bring. I think for me, when one of my strengths was when I started coaching Cloud9 is that I felt like I was a really good on-stage coach because I'm really good at pattern recognition and I could see everyone's screen and I've seen the demos of the other team. And as we're playing, I know what strat's going to work or what adjustments we need to make as we're playing. So, I would call timeouts and be like, we should do this, we should do that. And, if I could win a round or two in a match by those little inputs, I felt like that's where I can make a lot of the impact in real time.
One of the things, one of the players you referenced who was in the Complexity Lab was obviously Ye, who had an enormous Valorant career. If people don't know, a couple of years ago when he was in Optic, he was basically like probably the best player in the world. He was the guy on that chamber pick that was just carrying every game and he was the star AWPer and all that. Right? Obviously, this is years earlier. Could you see some of the sort of seeds of greatness? When you look back now, could you see the person that he became?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all could. He was so dedicated to the game. He was always, there was no break for him. There was no break time. He's in the server, he's tinkering, he's watching demos, he's coming and be like, oh, look at this, thing that Fallen does or Coldzera. So he was a student of the game. He had that Mamba mentality where it was never work for him. His mechanics were just incredible. I mean, he's almost savant-like. But at that time, he only had a few years of competitive play under his belt. So now that he switched to Valorant, he had all those years of Counter-Strike. It's no surprise to me. Now he had both the intelligence and the mechanics. So there's no surprise to me. At one point, he was the best.
One of the interesting things was the last team you did the official coaching with was this Cloud9 team, but it was one of the ones, if people don't remember, that had like mixed roster of international players. So I want to ask about a couple of these players. So even though you only got to work with them briefly, you actually did get to work with flusha, the notorious, the legendary flusha. What was flusha like to work with? Seems like an interesting guy, mate.
Yeah, he's very introverted, very quiet. We all moved to Los Angeles to play in boot camp, so I was with him all day. Reserved, but in the game he had one of the smartest intuitions where he just felt and knew where everyone was, and he knew the timings, and he would like this clutch round. It's a huge round. It was an Inferno. It was like a 1v2 retake. Goes through boiler. He's like flanking A side through hall, and the bomb's ticking, and there's like no time, and he takes like 5 seconds to hard clear this stair corner on the right, and there was someone there, and it's like no one would have ever checked that. No one would have spent 5 seconds to perfectly clear this, but he did. Ends up killing him, wins the round, like winning the match. And it's a place like that where you can't teach that, and to be able to watch him play and make those kind of plays, play in, play out, find the right little timing to flank, push up, clear corners. Like I said, he was part of that crew in Fnatic, I believe, that dominated Counter-Strike, and we got to see it every day. And there's no surprise he was one of the best at one point.
And then you also had the player who was the in-game leader of the later Fnatic, the player Golden. He was there at one point in time. Who was this guy to work with? as an in-game leader?
Golden, yeah. He was very smart, very passionate, great aim. I would say his only thing that he needed to prove upon was he had pretty big swings emotionally.
Right.
And I think he had super high standards for himself. And anytime he made a mistake, you could feel it. The whole team could feel it, right? So that was kind of the only thing that, the thing we loved and also didn't like, right? Because when he would win, like everything's on fire, energy's good. But if you lose a round, he would be down. So his emotional regulation was definitely one of the things that we talked about and tried to bring up with him. But no, he was a great player because he was kind of unproven at that point, and he was working with flusha, autimatic, like all the best players, and we recognized what was there. So I think he did a pretty good job while he was there, and I was happy to work with him.
Right, the big name from NA in this team was autimatic, as you say, who'd already won the major with the previous lineup at Cloud9 and was considered like a very good player. People used to say he was like a HLTV type top 20 player. Skills were really good. From interviewing him, he actually told me some stuff in an interview years later that was really interesting, bro. Like, it sounds like he's actually a really like unusual guy. Like, he told me all this crazy shit, dude. Like, that the reason he made himself like AWP and then take different roles is because he just wanted to challenge himself to like be better at the game in ways he wasn't before, which is kind of a bit unique, because I would say most pro players are like sports stars. When you've got your position and your spots and you're good at it, you just stick with that. You just stick being good. Not a lot of people want to like be bad at something and grind and get better. So I feel like you must have had an interesting sort of relationship with this guy. Who was autimatic to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start by saying I can't say enough good things about him. I felt like he was a complete package. Sure, mechanically, intelligence, in-game, all that stuff, right? Being able to pick up an op role when you've never really opt because your team needed it, and then becoming, one of the best, like top 10, 20, just shows what type of person he is, that he's willing to step up to the challenge. His work ethic, his passion to improve, his personality out of the game was phenomenal. Just very outstanding guy. Never heard him really complain. Great communicator, student of the game, always watching demos, like just phenomenal. One of my favorite players I've ever worked with.
After this time period, you did the Korean one with MVP, and you did Complexity, as you said, you had like a decent run to major. You did this international hype for Cloud9. Why nothing after this? Did you want to coach more? Did you try to? Why wasn't there why isn't there another 3 years of stuff to talk about? What happened to this time?
Yeah, so I guess I'll share the story of why I was removed from Cloud9. So before I joined Cloud9, 9 months before, Volcano reached out to me to beta test Valorant at Riot Games. So I agreed to it. It was contract. They flew in 10 people. I was committed. I told the general manager before Cloud9, here's the date of the beta test and so forth. So fast forward, 7 months, whatever, it's time to beta test. The whole team knows, Valens knows, we have a match online, and Valens was going to fit in. So that match got rescheduled to the next day. Valens had an appointment. So there was no coach. We ended up losing that match. Jack found out. He's like, why don't we have any coaches? We have 2 coaches. So found out that I was at the Valorant thing. He's like, hey, you're technically still in your contract and salary. Like, you should have been there. I'm like, I had an agreement, but, you're right. So anyways, after that, I got removed. And then, at that point, it was a pretty down period of my life, to be honest. It was like I had reached, they were like the esports team of the year. I was coaching like the best players. And it's like, it felt like everything else was a step down. So it was a dark period. I was like, what am I going to do with my life? But that's when it motivated me to start my YouTube channel. So I started my YouTube channel, FPS Coach, Rambo Kim. And that's where, I shifted all my focus. It's like, I always wanted to write a book on esports and Counter-Strike and FPS development. So I spent like 3 months doing that. One of the hardest things I've ever done. And then I was like, well, no one's actually going to read a book. So I was like, but people watch video content. So I converted all that book content into videos, dedicated the next 2 years into like my YouTube content. So just transitioned from coach into content creator.
If people want to experience your knowledge now, you still do this, right? You do classes and you have guides and stuff that people can access now, right?
Yeah. If you want to get lessons, you could go to FPS Coach. I'm happy to work with you, get on your webcam, watch your gameplay, provide feedback, review what you need to work on. Also start a community. You can find out on FPS Coach. It's $20 a month. I do weekly group training sessions. I have like 70 videos on aiming mechanics, mindset, all the things that I've learned in my pro career. So yeah, fpscoach.com.
Yeah, I'd also say if people don't know, this is part of why Ronald was a very good player. You haven't also just done like the basics. Like you've done all the angles, like how to say it, what type of mouse grip, what type of mouse should you use, what type of mouse. But you've essentially looked at almost every aspect because as a pro, you used to think about these things, right?
For sure. I mean, it's, hand-eye coordination. It's being able to position your grip, your arm, your elbow in the right positions to perform the certain motions. So depending on your game, you're going to need different setups and positions. You're going to need different grips, different sensitivities, and certain aiming drills to replicate the same motions in your game. So I was a director of esports at Aim Labs for a couple of years. So I helped design training programs, playlists, things that people would use to actually improve. So from that, I was able to combine kind of the science and technical aspects along with my playing career into the content that I create.
I have to say, if there's one thing I actually wish we could take back in time to early Counter-Strike 1.6 and give everyone, it was things like to have like aim bots and aim labs and all those like aim trainers, because back then you had like pod bots, but like it wasn't like an actual pro player, and like that wasn't really good practice. No, and we didn't have CSDM for the first few years. Like it actually was really whack out, but we didn't have any training tools in the early days. Just had to play the game, right?
Yeah, it was like public servers, pickup games. There was no deathmatch or specific game training, so it's kind of learning it through actual playing, and we couldn't really isolate that. So, yeah, it's just like But the problem with that is when you play deathmatch, you're like, there's so much down period. It's like you're clearing all these angles, like 5-10 seconds. You might not even see anyone. With aim training, you could sit there. It's like you specifically work on this motion, this distance, and it's like 500% more efficient in terms of building muscle memory.
I've got a little quick fire round. So all I need is I ask the question, give me the name, but then give me a reason. So it's just going to be from throughout your whole career, which player that you played with was the most skilled player?
I'm going to put K Sharp first because of his opping and deagle. Yeah.
Okay. What about who was the smartest player you played with?
Smartest player. Man, you know what? For some reason, Bombs comes to mind.
He's a pretty smart guy. Yeah.
He was smart, and he was a captain for a while. So there's different kinds of smarts. There's like crafty smart, and then there's like, I never would have thought of that kind of smart, like crazy smart. Right. But, Bombs was up there. I put Chameleon. Moto was also a very intelligent player. Storm was up there. I mean, so I got to pick a handful. I played with some amazing players.
Okay. What about who was the most clutch player you played with?
Clutch player. I think... I got to put Bullseye up there because he had some amazing clutches. By
the way, the clutch you're talking about, if I can find it, I'll link it. The one against Four Kings is bonkers. He does it with like a deagle against like guns, and it's actually one of the craziest rounds I've ever seen. And you would have lost the game if you lost that round. It was mental.
Would have been out of the tournament. Yeah. Yes. So I mean, that alone was
that was pretty good.
Up there.
I'll give him that memorable one. That was pretty fire. What about who was the funniest teammate?
Funniest teammate. I think Severs it was up there, honestly. Shagwire had his moments, he's just out of control.
In his case, probably unintentionally. He's just kind of a wacky guy, isn't he?
Wacky guy, yeah.
If people don't know, like the analogy I would give for Shagwire is he's sort of like Kramer from Seinfeld. If he just comes in the room, something crazy is going to happen. You know what I mean? Like he's just a weird guy.
Filter.
No, but in a good way. In a good way, sure.
Yeah. He's never afraid to be himself.
What about who was the best teammate, but in the sense of like as a teammate, like who actually was a great like team player or worked with the team the best? Who would you pick for that?
I would put Volcano up there. I think he was just so consistent, so reliable. No, he was just always never complaining. Again, showing up to time, performing. Just a really good person.
And then the last one I do is, who is the most underrated teammate you played with?
Underrated teammate. You know, I might give a shout out to Steel. Good old Ogo.
That's not a bad one. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was on there, and just he was like a big dog, where his rifles were just really clean and insane. Like if you were in his firing zone, you were dead. His bullet taps and recoil control and his movement, it was so clean, because at the time he would do a lot of AD strafes, where other people would just crouch and spray, but he was like, you know, being able to evade opponents. So yeah, shout out to Ogo.
Right. One thing I would ask you at the end is this. When I said earlier about K Sharp and how he played every other game and he played all the MMORPGs, but then he also played all the pickup games. He also played the HLDM. He played every game, including CS and sometimes instead of CS. I know that even though you were a very diligent player, you also played a lot of hours of other games too. Was there ever another game you could or would have liked to have gone pro in? Could you have been, I don't know, Warcraft Pro, Dota Pro? Is there another game that you could have gone pro in, do you think?
Yeah, so I was big into Warcraft 3. So I played Reign of Chaos and Frozen Throne. So I actually got to top 3 in 1v1 on the ladder.
Oh, okay.
And rank 1 in 2v2. So funny story about that. I love the game. Went to World Cyber Games. I met Grubby, who is the best orc player in the world. And I was like, hey, can I buy replays off you? And he's like, sure, $100 for 100 replays. Gave him $100. He sent me a zip file of all his like practice sessions, like these 100 replays that no one's seen before.
Oh wow! So it's amazing shit, right?
Behind the scenes, I got to see Michael Jordan practice, right, and all his moves, and I just ripped all his strats, and I got to top 3. So I had the micro, but I didn't have the tactical genius. Right. I mean, some of the stuff this guy pulled out, just literally like Mozart. He's like, Nikola Tesla of Warcraft. So Warcraft 3 was there. I played Quake 3 semi-competitively. I played for a team called Darkside. I was really good at Quake 3. I'll say my favorite game of all time is Ultima Online.
Oh, that was the original MMORPG from way back in the day.
Yeah, it was like 1997 to 2000, the golden years. Best game I've ever played.
The thing is, though, Ronald,
say the same
that's
thing.
where like the modern fan who plays World of Warcraft wouldn't like it, though, and I can tell you why. Because that game was so harsh. Like, essentially, everywhere except the city is PvP in that game. So, like, anyone can just meet you and steal all your shit and kill you, and you're just dead. Like, it was really brutal, right? That game was hardcore as fuck.
Yeah, they're the only protection zone city, and, when you go out and farm dungeons, like, it's like, do I equip my best stuff so if I can fight?
Yep.
Or if I die, I lose everything. Full body loot. Yes. So sometimes you'd have like $5,000 worth of gear, all the potions, magic items, all that stuff. So, but the actual, like, the whole game was just so amazing. The economy, the mechanics of the skill sets, like the warriors, mage clash, the spells, the dueling, being able to teleport anywhere, basically. Yep. Literally the best game ever made, Ultima Online.
At the end of this interview, do you have a final message? Is there someone you want to thank or say hello to?
I mean, well, thanks for the interview. It's always fun chatting, fellow old person. I just, shout out to any of my teammates that are listening to this, any of the players I've worked with. Always an amazing experience. And then, if you just want to check me out, it's at fpscoach.com.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadju, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.